Way back in the spring of 1990, 10-year-old me was given a $5 allowance. In search of something to spend my money on, I came upon something fantastic at my local convenience store newsstand. It was then that I started a lifelong obsession with the gold standard of sequential art, the comic book. Now, as an old man, I have decided to open up some old boxes and dig into my comic book collection. I decided it's time for me to review and analyze the illustrations and artists that made me comics crazy. What's good, everybody? This is Chris Crazy House, and I am back again with another episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy, and we are continuing our look at the popular miniseries from 1990 called The Return of the Sinister Six that appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man. And I always let you guys know which books we're going to be looking at, and normally I would have the original book, but I don't have this issue, so we're going to have to look at the collected version today, just for this issue, okay? I do not own this particular issue of The Amazing Spider-Man 337. I don't know how in the heck I missed it, but if I can be totally honest with you, I don't even remember seeing it back then. Like, I was good at looking on those shelves on the news rack, but let me remind you, this was at a time where in my neighborhood, we did not have an actual comic book store. That didn't come to a year later, and I remember because the new X-Men #1 by Jim Lee and Chris Claremont was coming out, and this comic book store was also having like a grand opening. So that's when we got our legit comic book store. Before that, I was buying everything off the rack at convenience stores. So 7-Eleven, Rite Aid, Quick Picks, gas station, whatever. That's where I was getting my comic books from. So I don't remember seeing this issue. And it might have been a situation where, because this was coming out bi-monthly, I noticed that some comic books did not show up at the gas station. Okay, because I guess they assumed they were getting their comic book for the month. They didn't realize another one was coming out, so maybe they didn't put it on the rack or whatever. But if I ever find the original, I will buy it. If someone wants to gift it to me, feel free to do so. I'll let you know as far as like where you can send it, you know, at a later date. If you have it and you want to gift it to me or something like that. I do get comic books as gifts from some fans out there, and because they know how much I love comic books and I'm probably never going to sell them. So they know that I will truly appreciate the book. So they usually just let me have it, and usually for nothing or just as a gift. But we're going to look at this version of it in the collected issue or the collected book of The Return of the Sinister Six. And we're going to take a look at this cover. I love this cover, by the way. That's how I know I didn't see it, because I would have definitely picked this up just from the cover. Okay. So in my opinion, this is probably, I guess you could say this was probably like the second best cover in this miniseries. Okay. Some of the other ones, like the last two, were not as great, but this one's a good one. And once again, it's not meant to be taken literally. Okay. Spider-Man does not get shrunken down by the villains and they're fighting him here. No, it's just a visual representation of the threat that Spider-Man is facing here on this cover. And I think Eric Larson did a great job at showcasing this. Okay, because I really like how the Sinister Six is drawn. They look very, very mean, evil, and creepy. And they're kind of towering over Spider-Man. His spider senses are going crazy. And just a great cover. And I really like the representation of all the characters. You get a great look, even though it's kind of just from more of like a bust, you still get a great representation of all the characters. And he was able to fit them in very closely too. Because a lot of these characters, especially like Electro, he has a lot of stuff sticking off of his costume. Dr. Octopus has his arms. The Hobgoblin has this kind of his hood or his cowl kind of crooning off here. But Eric Larson was still able to fit all these characters very well in here, and you're able to see how great they all look and get a great idea of their character designs based on what you're seeing. So very well done cover. Something that I would love to have created myself, and I might do like a fan interpretation of it someday, because I really like this cover. So we're going to get right into the story of what's going on here in part 4 of the return of the Sinister Six. So last off, when we left in the last issue, the character of Nathan, Aunt May's boyfriend, passed away. He was killed by the Vulture, and now we're at his funeral. So kind of a great way to start off this book by showcasing his funeral and showing it almost from a first-person perspective, like we're in the casket and everyone's looking down on us, and our family's kind of looking down on us. Very interesting way to start it, but very original, by the way. I really appreciate how this is done. And, you know, the fact that Eric took time to draw different people, because this could have been, he could have just cheated and just kind of drawn almost like the same person, or maybe like silhouettes or something like that, and just focused on Peter Parker and Aunt May and Mary Jane. But he took his time and went ahead and drew different people looking down on Nathan, people that might have known Nathan throughout his life. So that was actually pretty well done. I really appreciate how this splash page is done. So I guess one way of kind of keeping this simple, so he only has to really concentrate on the faces, was the fact that Erik Larsen drew, you know, he kept the bodies, kept the all the clothes are in black, just like I guess at a funeral it would be, but you know, all he had to really do was draw different faces for all the characters. So very cool. Okay. And you even have some people mentioning how they actually didn't like Nathan. They thought he was a grouch. And, you know, I mentioned that in some of the other issues as well, that some people actually didn't like Nathan at all, but at least they still showed up for his funeral. Okay. And Aunt May is sad, and Peter's worried about her being lonely now, that because not only has she lost Uncle Ben, and Peter has his own life now that he's married, but now she's lost her new boyfriend too, someone who she was kind of counting on spending the rest of her life with. And now that that's gone, Peter's feeling bad for Aunt May. And in my opinion, I've always thought Aunt May was too much of a crutch for the Spider-Man universe. That's just my opinion. I kind of wish that she would just kind of like die and stay dead, because at this point, it gets ridiculous when we're still always so overly focused on Aunt May. I get it that that's probably the only real family ties that Peter has, but the fact that she's been there so long and we kind of always keep having to focus on her, and Peter makes decisions, dumb decisions based on trying to help Aunt May, in my opinion, that's it's dumb. And you see that in later stories like Powerless, or later stories like, was it One More Day, when they really messed up Spider-Man with that story all linchpinned on Aunt May. I really wish they would just let Aunt May pass away and let her go, and let Peter continue with his life without having to use that as a crutch. Just my opinion, okay? Back to the story, by the way. So, we got the Sinister Six lounging in a warehouse in New Jersey. I was very hyped about this because I am from New Jersey, so anytime I saw New Jersey in a comic book, I was always happy to see that. Great showcase of all 6 members, finally all together this time. Okay, we're not just dealing with the characters in one page, or maybe at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book. They're finally all together now. Okay, and we get to see them drawn very well by Erik Larsen. Now, he does a way better job in the next series, The Revenge of the Sinister Six, but a good start right here. And I think this might even have more to do with the way it's being inked as well, because when I notice when Erik Larsen does all of his own pencils and inks, his artwork looks a lot different. It's a little bit more vibrant, and he does a lot more, he pushes a little bit, like the dynamic poses a little bit more. But this is actually pretty well done and competently done, okay? Good showcase of the characters, by the way. And basically what you have here is just Dr. Octopus explaining his master plan. So he's going to, remember when I told you that they were going to launch this spacecraft up into space, and it was going to map out all the ley lines or whatever. Well, Dr. Octopus, really what he's going to do is get some sort of poison and make that go in on the rocket ship and send that into the atmosphere. And that's part of his plan, is basically to hold the Earth hostage with this poison that he's going to shoot off into the atmosphere. So he needs the Sinister Six to help him get all the components. And first, he's going to break them up into teams. He's going to send some groups off to get some plans for one thing and send some group to get plans for another thing. So here's him basically handing off the assignments and some folders. So that's how they get their assignment for this this master plan of Dr. Octopus. So I find that funny. I guess mainly just because of the way it's showcased, like the fact that he just gave them a folder with their plans and they're part of the plan. You would think he wouldn't want to do that because just in case that plan is found, but who knows, right? So we get here to Peter Parker, and once again, he's still so worried about Aunt May that he's actually starting to push his wife away, telling her to just leave him alone. And like I said, I kind of wish they would just kind of let Aunt May go away somehow, because in my opinion, Peter should be continuing more with his adult life and not be overly worried about Aunt May all the time. And he makes really dumb decisions based on that. And at least when Mary Jane comes upstairs, he actually apologizes to her. But we get here to this element here. It's called Burundite. And this is what the component here that Dr. Octopus needs to steal, and he sends Mysterio and the Hobgoblin to steal it. Okay, so very cool shot too of Mysterio and Hobgoblin. This would actually be good as, like, if they enlarged this and made this a little bit bigger on the page and kind of give their showcase how they're like kind of busting in there. That would probably be a good like little kind of pinup page, but they were just really getting into that during this time. Okay. So once McFarlane and Liefeld and others kind of jump on in there, that's when the artists of this era start expanding certain points on their pages. So as the element is being stolen, some guy, he tries to hide it, but the Hobgoblin, he makes sure that doesn't happen, okay? He zaps it with the goblin beams or whatever they're called that he shoots out of his fingers. And Peter Parker just happens to be on campus and he hears this, right? So he makes a quick change to Spider-Man and he swings around. You can see his silhouette in the window as Hobgoblin is jacking up the security guards here at the university. They obviously can't handle him, but Spider-Man can. And here we go with number 2 of the very special splash pages that Eric Larson made of the Sinister Six and Spider-Man duking it out. Okay, we already saw one with the Vulture in the last episode, and now we're getting number 2 with Spider-Man versus the Hobgoblin. So if I can, let me give you folks my analysis or just kind of like my review of this splash page. So this is definitely not the best one of the bunch. I enjoyed the Vultures a lot better in the last issue. This one's okay, and what I like about it is, first of all, kind of Spider-Man kind of coming through the window. It kind of adds some a great effect here by when you have the glass all broken up and kind of floating throughout the actual splash page. That's actually a cool effect, and I like that because this is not easy to do, by the way, when you make falling debris or glass or whatever. Not an easy task to do, to draw all of that, but I think it is very effective in, just kind of showing some kinetic action of Spider-Man jumping through the window and hitting the Hobgoblin at the same time. Now, the logistics of it, and I guess the physics of how he's kind of jumping through the window and punching Hobgoblin as he's jumping by, don't really make sense, but we're kind of just going with the flow because it is a comic book. So we're kind of just going along with it and enjoying it for what it is. But, to me, it doesn't make sense. But I think this action scene could have been drawn a little bit better as far as showing the impact of him hitting the Hobgoblin somehow, or maybe not even touching the Hobgoblin, just showcase him busting through the window and maybe have him kind of, you know, coming at Hobgoblin maybe from like right here or something. Maybe that could have been better, but he wanted to do it straight on this way. And it almost makes me think that a lot of these splash pages were done ahead of time before they actually fleshed out what the story was in the comic. And they kind of built the story around some of the splash pages. That's my opinion. I don't know that for sure. I would have to ask Eric Larson someday. And to this day, he's one of the artists. That's one of my favorite artists that I've never actually met in person. I've met a lot of the other ones, but I've never met Eric Larson. I would definitely ask him, did they come up with the splash pages first or what? If he even remembers how it was done. But back to the battle. And we got, you know, Spider-Man, he kind of, I guess, flew by the Hobgoblin, but Hobgoblin has turned around and is now throwing pumpkin bombs at him. And Spider-Man also notices Mysterio there. So there's a lot going on here to where, you know, he hasn't figured out, or Spider-Man has not figured out that it's necessarily the Sinister Six per se, but he's worried that, you know, Hobgoblin and Mysterio are working together. And what Mysterio decides to do is he decides to hypnotize the other students that are here at the university to distract Spider-Man. And basically what he does is he makes them think that there's some big dude about to beat up a defenseless old lady. So all these people run and attack Spider-Man thinking he's some big dude that's going to hurt a little old lady. And of course, Spider-Man doesn't want to hurt them. So he's kind of trying to maneuver and get away from them without actually hurting them. And that's when we get to Mysterio and the Hobgoblin managing to escape without having to actually deal with Spider-Man. And, you know, once they leave, that's when the effects of the gas wears off and the people realize that they were fighting Spider-Man and not some big guy beating up an old lady. So now we're focusing on part of this little love thing going on with Flash Thompson and Felicia Hardy. And of course, she realizes that she's playing him. She's playing this man because she's trying to get back at Peter Parker for getting married. Once again, there are scandalous women out there like that get mad at you for leaving them behind and not wanting to deal with their toxic ways. So the way they want to get back at you is to destroy and hurt your best friend. So what happens is they're out, like, you know, hanging out at a basketball court, and they're going to try to rob Felicia Hardy. Now, she could fight back easily as the Black Cat, but she doesn't want to reveal her secret identity to Flash at this point. But what she doesn't bank on is that Flash is actually a man of action. You know, Flash did serve in the military, and he did, you know, he helps kids train with boxing, so he's no slouch. He's always been a natural athlete. So he starts busting these dudes' heads. He winds up knocking this dude out, knocking some of the other ones out. I mean, they look like young punks, or they look like they should be like rejects from like a 80s rock band or 80s hair band or something like that, right? And Flash is taking them out pretty easy. He winds up knocking all these guys out and getting Felicia her purse. And she wonders, she's like, oh snap. I've been using this guy and, you know, just kind of using him to get back at Peter Parker. And this dude actually stood up for me and saved my life. No one's ever done that before. So now she's starting to have some real feelings for him all of a sudden. You know, toxic girls can be like that too. When they realize they got a good guy, then they start falling in love. And that could be even more dangerous at some point. But switch back to the action. And we got the Vulture flying through the air with the Sandman attached to him. Okay. So they're going there to steal some equipment for Dr. Octopus. And they, you know, this is cool right here, but I wish we could have seen this in a better way. Maybe there was no way they could think of off the top just to create this effect of Sandman turning into sand and dropping in on this military base. I would have loved to have seen this in a better light, I guess, you know, because it looks weird right here. If you're not really familiar with Sandman's powers, you're kind of wondering what happened. And it's so small, you know what I mean? So I kind of wish this was done a little bit better, but I guess it gets the point across. And once again, bi-monthly comics, trying to figure out what comes next. You gotta move as quick as possible to get your deadline done. So I understand that. So They go to the military base, the soldiers, why they're trying to shoot Sandman. I would assume they would know who they're dealing with, that bullets are not going to affect him. But they don't. They're trying to shoot him. Bullets go through or bounce off. Vulture overturns a truck with gasoline in it, and it causes an explosion. And Spider-Man happens to be swinging by, so he decides to go in and help. It's interesting that he just happens to run into all the members of the Sinister Six while they're doing something. It's not like he was called. He just happens to be in the area when this stuff goes down. So he wants to capture Vulture really because the Vulture is responsible for killing Nathan. So he's really upset about that. And this action panel here is pretty cool. I like this. I like this a lot, the way Spider-Man is kind of jumping down on the Vulture. Okay? But as he's doing that, that's when the Sandman goes in to this tank, or it's like a specialized tank or whatever, and it winds up shooting a net to capture Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Man was able to avoid it, but in doing so, he's distracted from fighting the Vulture, and the Vulture winds up cutting Spider-Man's line, or his web line, with his wings. So Spider-Man is basically free falling out of the sky. Okay, and it doesn't look like there's a lot of things to actually swing on. So in order to save himself, what he does is try to create a little bit of a cushion for him to land in, almost like a little web hammock. And this is one of those Spider-Man tricks that I've seen in classic Spider-Man cartoons and in comics, but you don't really see it that much in movies. I think they should have that every once in a while, where Spider-Man doesn't necessarily have a building to hold on to, and he kind of has to grab on to something to kind of land in to save himself. And Spider-Man is feeling like it's not his day because he's run into 2 sets of villains already, and both times they've, just given the slip, and they got themselves a tank. They got some element called Birdite. So now they're off, and Spider-Man still hasn't put 2 and 2 together that it's the Sinister Six. You'd think he would by now, but that doesn't come till much later. So as he's kind of just sitting there waiting for the police to show up, Nova flies by. This is Nova, and at this point, I think Nova's a part of the New Warriors, or he's going to join the New Warriors at this time. So he's kind of just flying by in a random appearance in this book. And, Spider-Man wanted to ask for help, but Nova flies by too fast for him to get his attention. So they have their team up way later when Nova and Spider-Man fight the Tri-Sentinel. I might do a review of that book at a later date. So next part here, they're adding a little bit more onto that story about this weirdo named Jonathan Caesar, who is obsessed with Mary Jane and wanting to make her his lover. He's made all these photoshopped and real pictures of Mary Jane and has them all over his office. He wants to kidnap Mary Jane basically and take her away to this little remote island somewhere so she can just be with him and him only. So that's what this guy is plotting, and we're going to see more of this in the next 2 issues, okay? Come back to Electro stealing some plans, and he's the last of the Sinister Six that's kind of out here doing some crime. So he's out here stealing some plans, and that's when Spider-Man jumps in. He grabs one of these metal doors that Electro blew up and swings it back around and hits Electro right in his midsection. And that's when all the plans start flying up into the air. Now, the thing is, Spider-Man is actually running out of web fluid. I do like this plot device every once in a while where he's actually running out of his gear, or his clothes get torn or something, because Peter has to make all this stuff. This adds to the point that Spider-Man is actually an intelligent person that has to create parts of his own costume. So Electro is losing his plans. Spider-Man swings in to fight him. And we got number 3 of the grand splash pages of that Eric Larson drew of the Return of the Sinister Six. In my opinion, this is the weakest one. Okay? It's very random looking. It could be anywhere. It doesn't really have much to do with the story. I guess you can see pieces of paper from the quote-unquote plans that Electro was stealing flying around. But this could have been a lot better. Okay? I do like the fact that you have the extreme lighting of Electro kind of, firing off his electrical powers, and that extreme lighting here, lighting up front of the front of Spider-Man. That's kind of cool. And Spider-Man's pose itself is cool, but once again, just a very weak splash page compared to the other ones. When you see the other ones, you know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? They just got the silhouette background here. There's no ground level. He's basically just standing in the middle of the air. So this is one of the other reasons I suspect that a lot of these splash pages were done ahead of time, and they kind of rooted out, they kind of, rerouted the story around the splash pages. Like, because easily you could have just added some paper in his hands and added some paper floating around. This could have just been a very random splash panel of Spider-Man jumping down on Electro. Then they said, oh, well, this will be when Electro was stealing some plans, quote unquote. Let's add some paper here, add some paper in the background underneath the electricity, and that's how it went. So that's why I say there might have been something going on here where they had to kind of write around this artwork. Or who knows, maybe they came up with it before. I'll have to find out at a later date. If anyone knows, let me know in the comments section. Maybe you've talked to Erik Larsen and he lets you know what he was thinking when he created these. So Electro gives Spider-Man a big blast of electricity because Spider-Man tried to jump at him and it didn't work. And he calls for Dr. Octopus to get him out of there. And that's when Dr. Octopus's ship shows up and Electro is able to grab on and escape. So this is what we got, folks. The Sinister Six, they got their Birdite, they got the master plans, and they got themselves a tank. They got all the things they need to tick off their holding Earth hostage. So that's what we see here of Dr. Octopus getting together with all these guys, all his bad guys, all his henchmen, and confirming that he's got everything going good for him right now. I thought it was cool that they got him, kind of smoking a cigarette as he's kind of sitting there working on this and planning, and has another arm holding some coffee for him. So, that's the thing about Dr. Octopus. He can always be planning and doing something completely different with his arms in the background. So he's ready to take over Earth, and he's got the Sinister Six working with him. And next issue, this is what we're going to get. A battle royale with Spider-Man and the Sinister Six. So this is probably my favorite issue of the series, and I'm looking forward to doing a review of this. So that is my review for The Return of the Sinister Six, Part 4, and Amazing Spider-Man 337. I know I had a lot of critiques in this book, but don't get me wrong. Don't think that I hate it or I don't like it. These are just my adult opinions looking back on this book, okay? If I give my critique of some of these old comic books, that's all it is. When I was a kid, I was easily, blown away by a lot of this stuff because I love the artwork, I love the characters, I have fun with the stories, I enjoy drawing my own versions of these types of comic books and the characters. So I was just totally in love with it. But now as an adult who's done this as an actual job, and an adult who's worked, over 20 years as an artist, I can kind of look back on these things and, maybe rethink how I would have done things maybe a little bit differently. I can also talk about the things that I still appreciate and still love about these books, and also talk about, some of the weaknesses that I see. And once again, I don't want to come off as if I'm completely criticizing him, because once again, this is not easy. Doing 2 books a month is not easy at all. Even though Erik Larsen is very prolific, he's a very competent and quick drawing artist, it's still not easy to make those deadlines, okay? Because, anytime you're trying to make a deadline, I know this is my case, it seems like anytime I try to make a deadline, my life gets in the way. The fact that I'm, married, I have a child, or just whatever, something always pops up when I'm trying to make a deadline. So I understand how hard it can be sometimes. And I still appreciate the hard work that went into these classic comic books, as always. So you folks let me know how you feel about it in the comments section. And if you are looking forward to when I do this battle royale in the next episode, please go ahead and not only like this video, but make sure you subscribe to this channel and get more of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy. Anyway, folks, this is Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.